So the purpose of this video is to kind of go through a learn to play structure that I've been running this year that I feel like it's been very successful. Um, I've had the opportunity the last handful of years to be part of a few learn to plays. Uh, my oldest son, I was kind of the one who made the practice plans. It was kind of my first go around with it. After I got to see how learn to play kind of works, what works, what doesn't work, I've been able to kind of come up with like a different type of structure that I feel like solves a lot of the problems that a typical learn to play has. We've been able to put that into use this year. Overall, I think it's went very well. There are a few things I would potentially change for the future, but again, the point of this video is just to kind of share that information and hopefully pass it on to whoever runs the program after me. So, one, being part of Learn to Play, I would have to say, I've been running programs for 16 years. It is probably by far the hardest program to run. You have a large, well, one, a lot of programs have a large amount of kids on the ice. And that's the first thing I would say is anyone who's running a Learn to Play program, there's no reason to have really more than 32 kids in the program. You get 50 minutes of ice. By the time you get on the ice, you're really probably down to like 45 minutes by the time you get everything set up and all that, and the kids on the ice and everything else. So, that's really four-ish stations or four-ish groups, and I'll kind of go through that in a little bit. But that's 8 players per group. At this age, that's a lot. I would say for sure no more than 40. Any program that's putting more kids than that on the ice, it's just too many. There's no way you can run a quality program. All the coaches are typically volunteer parents with very little coaching experience. Every once in a while you'll get a coach who has an older kid and they coach and they're really outgoing and they're really good, but that's not the norm. So I would say that's number one. We really shouldn't be putting more than 32 kids on the rink. That's more than enough. At this age. The next part with this type of program is the age. You'll get kids who are 7, 8 years old just starting hockey, a little later, and then you'll get kids who are up to down to 3 years old. So that's a pretty big age gap. You got kids on the ice that are more than double the age of some of the youngest kids on the ice. So that's a big thing to kind of take into account. With that, then you got skill level. You'll have kids on the ice who have been skating 1, 2, 3 years, depending on the program. Some organizations offer multiple programs for the different ages. Some it's just one, and they're in the program for 2 or 3 seasons. I've seen both in my time, but the problem with that is you'll have kids who are on walkers, and it's literally the first time they've been on skates. And then you'll have kids who are buzzing around and they're ready to learn crossovers and stops and other things. So that's a pretty big range right there. And, so in my experience, what most programs run is they run a typical ADM style program. So they'll come on the ice, to do 4, 6, 8 stations, whatever they end up doing. The problem with running a station-based practice is, one, I find that most programs do not properly split the players up. Players come on the ice. The coach will kind of haphazardly do it based on, just kind of knowing the kids a little bit, but then you always got kids who come on late. And now you're just throwing them into groups. You're trying to get the kids split up. That takes time. And now, by the time they get to their groups, you're down to, 40, 42 minutes. Now you're trying to rush them through a drill. So now it's it's what I would call a rigid practice plan. There's no flexibility to it because now you're on a clock. You got 5, 6 minutes, 8 minutes if you're lucky, to get in your drill and get the kids as many reps as possible. And you're just rushing against the clock to get them moving. And then when you're trying to switch stations, that's an issue because sometimes half the kids don't even go to the correct station. Even if you tell them where to go, they don't do it. Or their dad's at another station or your mom, and they want to go hang out at that station, so they want to be with their parent. Or you got a kid in the corner crying because, who knows why, they're having a bad day or they're just, nervous to be on the ice. You have kids who are on walkers who can barely do the drills, so then the drills end up being very cookie cutter. They tend to really only benefit the kids, maybe in the middle level of the group. So the kids who are at the top half of the group really aren't getting what they need. and the kids at the bottom half of the group aren't getting what they need as well. It's really only benefiting the kids in the middle, because we're going to do drills that are, benefiting the most amount of kids. So that top and bottom, they kind of get left behind. Now the top, they can do the drills, but again, they're not being pushed to their maximum ability. You're not accelerating their development in any way. And then the bottom kids, half the time they're just kind of shoved in a corner, and no one's really helping them, or it's minimal. So that's kind of what I've seen with your typical learn to play program, is lots of kids, parent coaches. You don't know how many coaches are coming that day. It's typically not the most organized in that way. And like I said, the practice plan, doesn't really address everyone's needs. You got a wide variety of ages and levels. So again, there's a lot of problems to solve there. I went through that with my older son. I kind of saw how it worked. Like I said, I saw how it was ran, and then I was able to recognize all what I deemed as these challenges. And I tried to come up with a way to meet those challenges. So pretty much what I came up with was number one, you have to be really organized before you ever even step on the ice. So what I did was, and I tried to save everything, is I came up with an introduction, and you can steal this, but it's just a pretty basic introduction to that went out to the parent about a month ahead of time. So you can see I saved it on August 9th. We started in September. It just goes to the introduction, the schedule, saying we need coach volunteers, equipment, a little bit of about the Blades program. But then the main part of my purpose for this email is I wanted the parents to answer these questions. How long has your player been playing hockey? Does your player need a walker to skate? Were they previously in a learn to play program? And then rank them on a scale of 0 to 10 on these basic skills. So my purpose for doing this is one, from day number one, we need to be split up. And so what I did is I told the Blades we can't do more than 32 kids. I won't do the program if we're going to do more than 32 kids. Because I'm a really big believer that I don't even believe in running older kids programs with more than that many kids on the ice. So I can't imagine running the learn to plays that do more than that. So that was a pretty big thing for me is the number. And from that number, I wanted people to rank their player on these specific skills. All right. And basically, if your kid was, I wanted to split the kids up into 4 groups based on level. I didn't care how many kids were in that group. So, for example, if they said their player needed a walker to skate, they automatically went to group 4. So group 1 was the highest level group, group 4 was the lowest level group, and then groups 2 and 3 are in the middle. So when we first started day number 1, I think we had 12 kids on a walker out of 32. So again, that was, we just put them all into that group. And then anyone who said their player's been playing for 1 or 2 years, or they were older, or they ranked them a little bit higher on here. And I would say this was actually surprisingly, maybe I just got lucky, but surprisingly pretty accurate. The parents were pretty accurate with their assessment of their player's ability. I think I literally only had one player who a parent ranked higher than they should have, and having them move down a group. So that's number 1, is ranking the player on their abilities. And then from that, I split them up into 4 groups. So number 1 being the best, oldest kids, 2, the next step, 3 were like the kids who were just above walker level, but they could skate, but they didn't need a walker. And then group 4 was just anyone on a walker. And if my memory serves me correctly, we had 12 kids on a walker day 1. I think we had like 8 kids in group number 3, and I think we had 6 and 6 or whatever. Those groups were smaller for groups 2 and 1 and 2. So however that math worked out, but it was something along those lines. And what we did for the first days is we stayed in our group. So one suggestion I would make is once you make your 4 groups, based on the rankings and what players give each group its own color jersey. So have 4 different color jerseys. It makes it very easy to know how many kids are there that day from that group. If you're not going to do 4 color jerseys, at least do 2, but I highly recommend 4. It just makes it so much easier when the kids come on the ice and you know exactly where they're supposed to go. All right, so that's number 1. Oh, I have to go back for 1 second here. So for the coaches, part of this email I put, obviously if you want to coach, let me know, and then I send them a Google document. So this helps me stay organized in terms of who's showing up for coaches that day. So you'll see it's just the full schedule for the season. I put group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, and then from there, so what I did is I sent it to the coaches, and the coaches had to fill out their names. All right, so they put their names in all the days that they think they're going to be able to coach. I do give them access to it so they can go in and edit it and take their name on and off and stuff like that. But basically what I did was before the first day, I sent it out. This is who I show coming from, this day from group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, right? And then I did that for each day. And that way it just kind of keeps everything organized. I know exactly how many coaches are coming. Let's say, for example, here's a day where we didn't have anyone for group 1. I made sure that I was able to work with group 1 that day, right? So, or I was able to recruit a coach, hey, we really need someone this day, or hey, we're really light on coaches. Can anyone else come? So it really helps you stay organized in that way, because having enough coaches is probably one of the hardest parts. So by having the Google document, it keeps you really organized in who's coming and when they're coming and with what group are they going to be with. So that's the first point. All right, is the intro email and then the Google document. So second point, or next point, is once I split the kids up into groups, what we did the first handful of days, and as I said, I highly suggest having 4 color jerseys, and then have extra of each color, because the groups aren't set for this season. They should be fluid. Kids will move, and you'll probably take the first, 4 to 6 weeks to kind of figure that out. Kids moving around groups. So pretty much what we did for the first, I'd say 2 to 3 weeks is we had quarter ice practices for each group. So, group 1 was over here, then we had group 2, we had group 3, we had group 4. What I did was we had the door to the rink was right here. I put group 4 so they could easily get on the ice, and actually group 4 also had a door here. So group 4 being the walker group, so typically the youngest kids, the kids who are going to need the most help, I made sure that they had 2 doors that they could get in and off the ice very easily. I put group 1 and group 2 on the far side of the ice where parents really couldn't access them as well. And then group 3 was here, and they had an access to this door because, again, they're most likely the younger kids. So, our first 2 to 3 weeks, it was completely separate practice plans. Group 1 had their own practice plan, group 2 had their own practice plan, group 3, group 4, and they were just done in their quarter of the ice. Now, the advantage to this was right from day 1, we were able to meet that group's needs, right? So group 1 is the best, oldest kids. Right from day 1, they were getting to, practice hockey stops and crossovers and, doing some compete drills and, other things. Where group 4, so their plan was fairly structured, maybe a little higher level, in terms of, are the groups on the ice. But then group 4 was pretty much not structured. It was kids on walkers. We just got to get them moving. Our goal is to get them off the walker as fast as possible. They're the kids who are the least comfortable on the ice, so get them comfortable being out there, having fun. This group also had the most amount of coaches. So again, I highly suggested that if their kid was on a walker, they should provide a parent to come on the ice, if possible at all, which I'm pretty sure out of 12 kids, we had like 8 parents in that group for the first little while. So that was pretty helpful because now we had more than enough coaches to work with all those players. And again, now all those players had a quarter of the ice to work with. Group 3 was the next smallest group. Their plan was just fun and games, right? Just get them moving, fun and games. They're not going to be able to do any drills. They're still pretty young, but they don't need a walker, so they can do a little bit more. So just, fun and games, maybe a few pattern drills where they follow a pattern around. Group 2 was just a lesser version of group 1. So these 2 plans are pretty similar, but these kids were still on the average a little bit younger. Attention span's not as great. So still it was like a mix their plan was like a mix of group 1 and a group 3, right? So a little bit more fun, but also had some hints of like, we can do some more drills now, like, practice crossovers and some other things, and maybe, things with pucks, where this group, we're just kind of learning how to skate and be comfortable moving on our edges still. There wasn't a whole lot of pucks, and that's kind of the plan. So, for the first 3 weeks, we kind of stuck with this 4-group format, and it was really nice. Kids came on the ice, they knew exactly where to go. Right, group 1 was always here, group 2, group 3, group 4. They went on and they did their thing. The other nice thing about running it this way is the kid got to always stay with their parent. And I think that's really big with learn to play programs, right? Is that the parent and the kid get to be together, right? The only reason the parent's on the ice is to coach their kid, right? And the kid wants to be with their parent. That's what's going to make them feel the most comfortable. So, the station-based plan splits them up. Now you have parents away from their kids. They can't watch. They don't really want to, do it, but they know someone needs to be out there, right? So again, it's just not the most ideal situation from that regard. And I know some might say, well, you're doing a quarter ice practice, station-based practice requires no setup. You're going to require setup. Well, if you, and I'll go through practice planning in another video, but when you only have 8 kids, you're keeping it pretty simple anyways. Setup is minimal. But now this type of setup where it's still small groups. So what's the ADM main points are small groups, lots of reps. Well, this is still small groups. We had 4 groups of 8 on average. Obviously, like I said, the walkers was more, but that was more of a free skate anyways. So they're doing, skills to their level, which is the most important thing. They're doing it in small groups, and they are getting lots of reps. So they're still hitting the ADM style. The biggest difference is where now the plan is flexible. So instead of being rigid and being on a time clock, I can be flexible with my plan. Like, we're trying a drill. It's not going well at all. Okay, let's move on from it. Don't fight the battle. Just move on and do something else. Or you know what? They're not having a good day. Let's play games. Or you know what? Hey, this drill's going really well. How many stations did that happen at? I would love to do this for another 2, 3, 5 minutes. Or if I had another 2, 3, 5 minutes, I think they could get it and really get something from it today. But you got to move to the next station. Well, that in this type of plan, that doesn't happen, right? You are able to do what you want when you want. You can have a plan, but the plan is flexible. You can modify the plan on the fly, and I think that's very, very important for these young ages because you want to keep them moving, but not everything you're going to try is going to work, or sometimes you want to do something different, or you see something and you want to be flexible with the plan. And then again, you're constantly meeting their needs in that moment. So that's what I thought is really big point to this as well. So anyways, kind of moving on from that. So what this turned into is because the kids on the walker were getting a lot of, they had a big section of ice, which that typically doesn't happen in most learn to play programs, to work with. They got to skate and move a lot. The coaches were told, our goal is to get these kids off the walkers ASAP. We do not want to have to bring the walkers out every week. They're cumbersome, and that would be one thing I would also suggest is don't use walkers, use little chairs. So the little chairs, little kid chairs are better than walkers because they can lean on them and keep them in front of them. And they can also be used for other things like chair pushes, which I think is a really drill they should be doing pretty much every practice. So in the sense of another kid sits in the chair and they're pushing against resistance. So that's why I would suggest getting little chairs and not necessarily using walkers. But either way, the coaches were told we need to get them off ASAP. I think we had every kid off the walker in 3 weeks. It might even been less than that. It might even been like 2.5 weeks. But it was very fast. And that was the first thing that surprised me is how fast we were able to get the kids off the walker. Because my experience with my other son is we had kids who were on the walker the whole season. And I think partly why is they were kind of ignored. They were kind of thrown, told just to stay below the goal line. They weren't really given anything to do, so not a lot of ice. And they They didn't really get a lot from it. Where these kids, because they were given a quarter of the ice, because the coach, we had a good amount of coaches out there working with them, and most of them working with their own kid and maybe taking someone else under their wing. They were motivated to get their kid off the chair, right, or off the walkers. So, we had the kids off very fast, and then from there, we modified it, right? So, there was a couple, most of the kids from group 4 that were off it fast, maybe went to group 3. We had a couple older kids who was their first time skating and they needed the walker. They went to like 2. So again, in time, these kids went to other groups. We had a couple kids from group 2 move to group 1 because they just were better by the time we're evening things out. I think we had a kid from group 1 go to group 2. So again, like I said, the first 3, 4, 5 weeks, you will be moving kids around the groups, but after that, everyone kind of settles into their group. So then what we did was, now that everyone was settled into their group after the first month and a half, we continued with our quarter ice practice plans. But then what we started doing, which was really cool, as this kind of evolved in time, was the warm-up the groups would do together. So for the younger kids, we would just put them on the goal line, right, and just have them skate end to end, okay, just back and forth. So it might be simple things. I usually start off like, let's sprint down the ice, back and forth. Okay, let's jump over the blue line. Let's jump over the red line. Let's dive on our belly. Then we might play sharks and minnows. For these kids at first, the sharks had to be the coaches because they couldn't figure out how to play sharks and minnows. Maybe red light, green light, stuff like that. We play soccer where we just put the balls out. They had to, kick the balls length of the ice or just have free time. So again, this group was a little bit more fun, and in that way, we're like the older group. What they started doing was what I would call around the rink drills. They would put their 2 nets, and they were doing basic edge drills. So they might, some of them similar might be like dive on the belly, or they would do knee touches or sprint between the blue line or crossovers, or maybe inside edge or stand on 1 foot or jump over the line. So, but they were skating around in a big oval. And what would happen is the coach would yell out different drills based on that. So now we got all the kids moving. But again, what do we have here? We have kids skating the full length of the ice. That doesn't happen in Learn to Play programs in my experience. There is benefit to kids skating the full length of the ice, to them trying to get up to as fast of a speed as possible. Again, yes, we want to work on edges and other things, but there is a benefit to that. So by, having the 4 groups, but then groups 1 and 2 doing their warm up together, we're able to get the full length of the ice in. Same with groups 3 and 4, be able to get the full length of the ice in. So now what happens is the groups would do their warm up together, and then they'd split up. Group 3 would do their own thing, group 4 would do their own thing, groups 1 and 2. So as the kids in time started to evolve, like you had kids getting better very fast from all groups, then by the end of the year, I'd say about halfway, maybe Thanksgiving through the year, all of a sudden now we have groups 1 and 2 are pretty close in level, groups 3 and 4 are pretty close in level. So then what started happening is we started doing this type of plan. So now it pretty much became groups 1 and 2 were together all the time. Groups 3 and 4 were together all the time. But what we did was, for example, groups 3 and 4, and they stayed with this practice plan the whole season, they would do their full length drills like this, or warm up. Then we'd split up into 3 groups. So we would split up end zone, middle, and end zone. 16 kids. We roughly did about 4 or 5 kids per group. Most days I would say it was 3 to 4 because we always were missing a handful of kids, and there was a station here, a station here, a station here. So we'd take the first 15 minutes, do a warm-up, maybe a game or 2 with that using the full length of the ice. Then we'd split up to about 6-7 minutes per station, end zone, middle, end zone. The stations pretty much always stayed the same, and that's another thing I would say for Learn to Play is there's nothing wrong with doing the same stations over and over and over again. We didn't change a lot, and like I said, in another video I'll go through practice planning and drills. We didn't change a lot with these young kids. Repetition little ways to make it harder or competitive was very useful for them. But it allowed us to always keep them moving. Pretty much the young kids came on the ice and they didn't stop moving for 45 minutes. So then by the time we did all that, the full length and then the 3 stations, there's usually about 10, 12 minutes left. Now what we went back to is we always finish with chair pushes. So we'd put kids would grab a partner and they'd push their partner again the full length of the ice. So we actually would hide the chairs off the ice because we didn't want kids to see them. We'd only bring them out for chair pushes, and that was the only time they were allowed to use them. They'd push their partner the full length of the ice, get to the other end, switch, and they're just going back and forth, right? And the kids, that is probably their favorite drill. Even though it's hard and they're pushing against resistance, that is probably the thing they always ask for. They love doing it, and it's such a good drill for the young kids to have to learn how to get low and push through their edges. And we've done that every single practice the whole year with them, and we usually did that the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 minutes, whatever it was. Sometimes we might do it 5, 6 minutes and then finish with something else or give them free time. But that was kind of the general plan for groups 1 and 2. Or sorry, groups 3 and 4. Groups 1 and 2, they would do their around the rink drills. They were a little bit different. Sometimes they would do the 3 stations that as well. Their stations would be different. Again, pretty much now we have 2 different programs operating. We have, let's say, this is level 1 group operation. This is level 2. So their plan is going to look a lot different than this plan. These kids are ready to learn crossovers and tight turns and hockey stopping, not just snowplow stopping. So their plan should reflect that. They need to be pushed to their ability. So as I said, their coaches tended to do it a little bit differently. They would do their around the rink drills. They might use the 3-station format, or they might just go to their ends, group 2 and group 1, and do their own thing on their own. In time, we also did other things like this. So when we wanted to start teaching them crossovers, we would draw circles around the dots. So again, flexibility of plan. Now we would draw circles. We have 4 circles. Pretty simple. There's multiple ways to do it, but you could put kids at each circle and just tell them to skate around the circle and practice their crossovers. You could do the old, fashion drill, put everyone in the corner, a couple kids at a time around the circles. But again, now all of a sudden you have 4 circles to work with, practicing your crossovers, and different things like that. So what I'm getting at here is, for this video, the whole point of it is to kind of show you how to set it up, how to split your players up in advance, show you the email I sent out, how I find my coaches, go through some of the challenges that I've found with Learn to Play programs in the past, how we met those challenges, and I think successfully met those challenges to be able to provide all the players with a program that meets their needs, right? The youngest, we had all the kids off the walkers within 3 weeks. We had the kids in groups, and they're doing drills in a program that fits their needs and not, just a cookie cutter program. It was flexible. We were able to use the ice in multiple different ways. And most importantly, the kids went on the ice and they never stopped moving. They were always moving. They're always doing something. So, again, this is kind of the structure we used. It modified in time. As I said, day 1 or, the first handful of weeks, it was 4 groups, kids on walkers. Then it kind of evened out to other groups. And then in time, that molded into almost 2 just bigger groups that kind of work together, but then maybe there's stations. So again, we're able to use the full length of the ice, small areas of the ice, keep it flexible. If things weren't going well that day, we could change it up. It kept players with their parents. That now you're all of a sudden you're getting more, volunteers who are willing to come on the ice. Why? Because they're able to work with their kid the whole time. This is what I would highly suggest running. But the key to running it in this way is, my first suggestion is you need a strong head instructor that is willing to do a little bit of work in advance, and then each group should have a head instructor. So group 1 should have a head instructor, group 2, group 3, group 4, and or then eventually when it molds into just the 2 sides, you need 1 and 1. You can't rely on one coach to run everything. That isn't the most ideal way to do it. So you do need a handful of leaders that believe in this type of plan and program to do it this way. But again, after running it this year and seeing the improvement of the players, I really do feel like this is the only way you should run a Learn to Play program, because it meets the needs of all the players and not just a select few. So in another video, I'll go through drills and setup and things that we did this year that I thought worked really well, and things that maybe I would do differently. But this kind of gives you the framework and of how to set it up, the framework of how to use the ice, utilize the ice to its maximum, the framework of how to each meet the player's needs, as I said.